For most people, the ultimate nightmare in the wilderness has a familiar face. A grizzly bear. A wolf pack. A mountain lion hidden somewhere beyond the trees. But in the winter of 2018, deep inside one of America's most isolated forests, something happened that doesn't fit any known predator attack, accident, or criminal investigation. A seasoned wilderness survivor disappeared. Months later, investigators found blood. Then bones. Then questions that still have no answers. And to this day, one critical piece of evidence has never been recovered. The skull of Jordan Grider. What happened to him remains one of the strangest wilderness mysteries in recent memory. Jordan Grider was 29 years old and originally from Moriarty, New Mexico. Unlike most people, Jordan wasn't chasing a traditional life. He wasn't interested in offices, cities, or suburban neighborhoods. The wilderness was his home. For more than a decade, he lived almost entirely outdoors, traveling through forests, rivers, and remote backcountry areas across the United States. People often assumed he was homeless. Jordan always corrected them. He had simply chosen a different way to live. The woods weren't where he escaped life. The woods were life. In September of 2018, Jordan returned home to visit family. He spent time with his father and brothers, catching up before heading back into the wilderness once again. According to relatives, he seemed happy. Relaxed. Excited about his next destination. Before leaving, he told them he had found an incredible place to camp and expected to be gone for several months. Nobody thought much of it. Jordan disappearing into the wilderness for weeks or months wasn't unusual. It was normal. In late October, he pointed his truck north and began a journey toward one of the most remote locations in America. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota. More than 1 million acres of dense forest, frozen lakes, winding waterways, and terrain so isolated that entire sections can feel untouched by modern civilization. When Jordan arrived, he parked near the Sioux Hustler Trail and hiked deep into the wilderness. Roughly 1.5 miles from the trailhead, surrounded by thick forest and almost complete isolation, he established camp. He even sent photographs to family members. Everything appeared normal. Nothing seemed wrong. But then winter arrived. Temperatures dropped. Snow buried the landscape. And Jordan Grider vanished. For months, nobody knew anything was wrong. The forest simply swallowed him. Then, in early April of 2019, authorities conducting a welfare check entered the area where Jordan had been camping. What they discovered immediately raised alarm. The campsite was still there. But Jordan wasn't. Instead, investigators found large amounts of blood throughout the camp. Blood stained his sleeping area. Blood covered portions of the shelter. Blood appeared in multiple locations around the site. Yet despite the disturbing scene, there was one major problem. Heavy snow still covered the ground. If there were additional clues nearby, they were buried beneath several feet of ice and snow. Investigators documented what they could and left. 3 weeks later, they returned. By then, much of the snow had melted. What emerged from beneath it transformed the case into a mystery that still haunts people today. Scattered around the campsite were human bones. Not a complete skeleton. Not a body. Just fragments. Pieces of ribs. Vertebrae. Parts of limbs. Broken remains spread across the forest floor. Some bones appeared damaged. Others were fractured. Several were found separated from the main area entirely. Nearby, investigators recovered personal belongings. Pieces of torn clothing. A damaged jacket. His phone. Various items from camp. And perhaps the strangest detail of all. Jordan's handgun. A loaded 9mm pistol. Still ready to fire. Not a single round missing. Not one shot fired. That detail would become the center of the mystery. Because Jordan wasn't inexperienced. Far from it. This was a man who had survived in remote wilderness environments for more than 10 years. A man who understood danger. A man who carried protection. Yet whatever happened out there unfolded before he ever pulled the trigger. Search teams expanded operations across the surrounding forest. Volunteers formed search grids. Specialized dogs were brought in. Investigators combed through the area again and again. Additional bone fragments were eventually recovered. But one crucial piece remained missing: Jordan's skull. No matter how thoroughly they searched, they never found it. And as the months turned into years, the mystery only became deeper. In August of 2020, forensic testing finally confirmed the bones belonged to Jordan Grider. The identification was definitive. The questions, however, remained unanswered. Because when investigators released their conclusion, the official cause of death contained only 2 words: unknown. No homicide. No confirmed animal attack. No explanation. Case closed. For Jordan's family, especially his mother Rebecca, that answer was impossible to accept. Because something had happened in those woods. Something had left blood everywhere. Something had scattered his remains across the forest. And somehow, despite all the evidence, nobody could explain what it was. The deeper people looked into Jordan's final days, the stranger the story became. Because years after his disappearance, investigators and online researchers discovered something unexpected. Jordan had been recording videos before he vanished. And what those videos captured would spark theories that continue to circulate to this day. As investigators struggled to determine what happened in the Minnesota wilderness, Jordan's family searched for answers of their own. His mother developed a theory almost immediately. She believed a pack of wolves may have attacked him during the early days of winter. At first glance, it sounded possible. The region is home to gray wolves, and Jordan was camping alone in one of the most isolated areas in the country. But the more experts examined the evidence, the more problems appeared. Fatal wolf attacks on humans in North America are extraordinarily rare. In fact, documented cases are almost unheard of. More importantly, the campsite didn't match what investigators would expect from a violent predator attack. There were no obvious signs of a prolonged struggle. No destroyed shelter. No scattered equipment. No evidence that Jordan had fought desperately for his life. Just blood. Silence. And questions. Another possibility focused on an accident. Rebecca knew her son carried a straight razor and often shaved while living in the wilderness. Perhaps, she wondered, he accidentally severed an artery and bled to death before he could get help. But that explanation quickly ran into problems as well. Investigators found no evidence supporting such an injury. The cutting tools recovered from camp were properly stored. Nothing suggested a fatal shaving accident. Again, the theory collapsed. Months passed. Then years. And the mystery seemed destined to remain unsolved forever. Until internet researchers began examining Jordan's online activity. What they found reignited public interest in the case. Before disappearing, Jordan had uploaded several videos from his remote campsite. At first, they seemed ordinary. The kind of recordings countless campers post online. But people soon noticed something unusual. In one video, Jordan appears to hear a strange sound somewhere beyond the darkness. A low vocalization echoes through the forest. Not clearly human. Not clearly animal. Something in between. Jordan attempts to locate the source. He points his camera toward the darkness. But whatever produced the sound remains hidden. Nothing appears on screen. Only the noise. Then came a second recording. This one disturbed viewers even more. Inside his shelter, Jordan can once again be heard reacting to sounds coming from outside. As he listens, he casually mentions something he hadn't previously told his family. He claims to have discovered large handprints on his truck. Not animal tracks. Handprints. And according to Jordan, they were far larger than his own. That single statement would eventually become the fuel for countless online theories. Because when people compared the videos with the physical evidence, certain details stood out. Jordan had spent more than 10 years surviving in remote wilderness environments. He knew how to handle danger. He understood predators. He carried a loaded firearm. Yet he never fired it. Whatever happened unfolded incredibly fast. Or perhaps so unexpectedly that he never had a chance to react. His remains were discovered around the campsite. His clothing was torn. Some bones appeared damaged. And one critical piece of evidence, the skull, had vanished completely. For believers in unexplained phenomena, the mystery seemed to point toward something far stranger than wolves or accidents. Online discussions exploded. Some argued Jordan encountered an unknown predator. Others suggested a human attacker. And then there were those who believed something else entirely was responsible. Something that had supposedly been reported in forests across North America for generations. Stories of massive human-like creatures. Unidentified vocalizations in remote wilderness areas. Gigantic footprints. Disappearances that seemed impossible to explain. Of course, there is absolutely no verified evidence linking such creatures to Jordan's death. No physical proof. No confirmed sightings. No scientific conclusion. Only speculation. Yet for many people, the unanswered questions remain difficult to ignore. Why didn't he fire his weapon? Why was there so much blood? Why were portions of his remains found scattered across the area? And perhaps most importantly, why was his skull never recovered? The truth is that nobody knows. Jordan Grider wasn't searching for mysteries. He wasn't investigating legends. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply a man who loved the wilderness more than almost anyone else. A man who chose forests over cities. Campfires over houses. Silence over crowds. And somehow, in the place he felt most at home, his story came to an end. Officially, the case remains closed. The remains were identified. The investigation concluded. The cause of death remains unknown. But for many people, one detail continues to stand above all the others. That untouched handgun. Because experienced survivalists rely on instinct. Years in the wilderness teach them how to recognize danger long before it arrives. Jordan possessed those instincts. Yet whatever happened in that frozen forest occurred before he could use them. And if Jordan's story sounds unsettling, the next case is even harder to explain. Because unlike Jordan, the next man wasn't simply experienced in the wilderness. He was considered one of the world's foremost experts on surviving among dangerous predators. A man who spent decades studying grizzly bears. Tracking them. Capturing them. Understanding them better than almost anyone alive. And when he vanished in the remote wilderness of Canada's Yukon territory, investigators discovered something that would shock even seasoned search and rescue veterans. His shattered skull. A missing body. And footage recovered from his own camera that some people still debate to this day. His name was Bart Schleyer. And what happened to him remains one of Canada's most chilling wilderness mysteries. On September 14, 2004, Bart Schleyer stepped off a float plane and into one of the most remote wilderness regions in North America. 2 weeks later, he was gone. When search teams finally located evidence of his fate, they found something deeply unsettling. A skull. Shattered. Bone fragments scattered nearby. And no trace of the rest of his body. Even today, nobody can say with certainty what happened in the wilderness surrounding Reed Lakes in Canada's Yukon territory. And that's what makes this case so disturbing. Because if anyone should have been able to survive out there, it was Bart Schleyer. Born in Cheyenne, Wyoming, Bart developed a fascination with wildlife at an early age. As a child, he traveled to Africa with his father, an experience that would shape the rest of his life. Over the following decades, he became far more than a hunter. He became a wildlife expert. A tracker. A conservationist. A man whose entire existence revolved around understanding animals. He earned advanced degrees, worked with grizzly bear research programs throughout the American West, and became heavily involved in wildlife conservation projects. His expertise eventually took him around the world, including extended work in Russia helping protect endangered Siberian tigers. Bart wasn't the type of outdoorsman who merely visited the wilderness. He immersed himself in it. He crafted traditional bows by hand. Started fires using primitive methods. Lived comfortably in environments that would overwhelm most people within days. Friends described him as exceptionally skilled, calm under pressure, and deeply connected to nature. If danger existed in the wild, Bart usually saw it before anyone else. Which is why what happened next makes so little sense. In September 2004, Bart arranged transportation into the Reed Lakes region of Yukon. The area was spectacularly beautiful. Towering mountains. Crystal clear lakes. Dense wilderness stretching for miles in every direction. It was also incredibly isolated. Once the floatplane departed, Bart was effectively alone. He carried everything he needed. Camping equipment. Food. A hunting rifle. His handmade bow. A camera. Enough supplies to remain in the wilderness for weeks. When he failed to return as expected, concern quickly turned into alarm. Authorities launched a search operation. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. Near the lake, searchers located Bart's inflatable boat. It appeared untouched. Not damaged. Not destroyed. Just sitting there. Nearby stood his campsite. Again, nothing immediately suggested a violent attack. His belongings remained in the area. Some equipment appeared neatly placed. Certain items looked almost intentionally arranged. Then investigators discovered blood on a camouflage face covering. And shortly afterward, searchers found the skull. The damage was severe. Fragments of bone were scattered around the location. Yet despite extensive searches, no other major remains were recovered. The rest of Bart's body had seemingly vanished. Naturally, authorities considered a grizzly bear attack. The Yukon contains a large population of grizzlies, making the theory reasonable at first glance. But several details complicated that explanation. Food remained near the campsite. Experienced wilderness personnel noted that bears are strongly attracted to food sources. Yet the camp itself showed surprisingly little disturbance. There were also few indications of the kind of violent struggle typically associated with a fatal bear encounter. The scene felt strangely incomplete. As though part of the story was missing. Those who knew Bart struggled to accept the official explanation. This was not an inexperienced camper. This was a man who had spent decades studying large predators. Someone who understood animal behavior at an elite level. Could a bear still have killed him? Absolutely. Nature is unpredictable. Even experts make mistakes. But many felt the evidence left unanswered questions. Then another strange detail emerged. Photographs and video recovered from Bart's camera. One image appeared to show unusually large footprints near a lakeshore. Without measurements, investigators could not determine their exact size. But the photograph immediately captured public attention. Then there was the video. Only a few seconds long. Brief. Blurry. Difficult to interpret. Yet viewers claimed it showed a tall, dark, human-shaped figure moving near the tree line before disappearing into the forest. The footage was far from conclusive. Skeptics argued it could be almost anything. A shadow. A person. An optical illusion. But once the images entered public discussion, speculation exploded. Online communities began connecting Bart's death to legends that have existed throughout North America for centuries. Stories of giant creatures inhabiting remote forests. Accounts passed down through generations. Tales of strange vocalizations, enormous footprints, and fleeting encounters deep in the wilderness. Again, there is no verified evidence linking any legendary creature to Bart Schlayer's death. No scientific proof. No confirmed connection. Only theories. Yet the mystery persists because the known facts remain difficult to fully explain. A highly experienced outdoorsman vanished. His skull was discovered. His body was not. And the exact cause of death remains uncertain. For many, that's where the story ends. But for others, it becomes part of a larger pattern. Stories emerging from vast wilderness regions where people disappear under circumstances that seem to defy easy explanation. Perhaps there is a perfectly ordinary answer hidden somewhere within the evidence. Perhaps one crucial detail was overlooked. Or perhaps the wilderness still contains mysteries we don't fully understand. What makes Bart's story especially tragic isn't the speculation. It's the man himself. Friends and family remembered him as generous, kind, and endlessly curious. Someone who dedicated his life to studying and protecting wildlife. Someone who felt more at peace in nature than anywhere else on Earth. The forests, mountains, and animals weren't simply interests. They were part of his identity. And in the end, the wilderness he loved became the setting of his final mystery. Somewhere in the immense Yukon landscape, the missing pieces of Bart Schlayer's story may still exist. Hidden beneath snow. Buried beneath soil. Waiting silently in a place few people will ever see. And until those answers are found, his disappearance remains one of the most haunting unsolved wilderness cases in North American history. Because sometimes the most frightening mysteries aren't the ones we can explain. They're the ones that leave just enough evidence behind to prove something happened. But never enough to tell us what.